From a very young age, we are taught to be sharp and smart and intelligent. We go to school for this very reason from a very young age, trained. As we grow up, we then realize that those with high IQs have an edge, a very sharp edge, very much like a knife that can cut through problems, scenarios, and being able to solve these things very quickly as well. But sometimes having a high IQ isn't always a good thing. It's not the be all end all. It's not the epitome of what a human being should be striving for or should be capable of. IQ is just one particular category of intelligence. We know that there's also emotional intelligence, being able to interact accordingly in social environments, being able to connect with different people, understand them better. But once again, understanding them better can hopefully give us an edge. We can sell the product we're trying to sell in a better way. Understanding other people's needs, we can tailor our sales pitch so that they can buy this product. We can close them. A lot of this IQ, EQ, or emotional intelligence, all of this stuff is always about how you can capitalize and gain an edge, be better than other people, be better than your peers. But it's not always a good thing. It's very apparent that in this day and age, people with very high IQs can still have mental problems, can still fall into depression, can still suffer from different psychological problems. And so clearly it's not the be all end all. If a high IQ was the solution for everything in life, then in that case, if someone was inflicted with a psychological problem, then surely this high IQ should be able to solve it. But that's not always the case. Simply because if you liken a high IQ with a knife, where a knife cuts through the problem, to dissect it, to see the inside, to gain the understanding, to then overcome this problem and obstacle, then we can very quickly see that not every single problem requires a sharp edge. Some forms of understanding have a more inclusive approach. It's not about being sharp. If there's conflict between different parties, different countries, if you look at the political world, being sharp isn't always the ideal thing or the ideal way to approach these problems. Because cutting through these problems on this international sphere would mean that we are cutting through segments of groups of people. We are separating and creating a distance between different categories of people. When there's a war going on, using your IQ, are you trying to figure out who's in the right and who's in the wrong? Because very often problems that are used to determine your level of IQ are really just about right and wrong. And in this life, where we are encouraged to see life as either black or white, even though the world is grey, we know that just a high IQ alone isn't appropriate. Now, even though I've used this example, a lot of you know that I mainly speak about spirituality and self-development in that regard. And so when it comes to spiritual exploration, which is more of the internal exploration, you also come by obstacles. But the obstacles that you come by need to have a different approach. It's not an obstacle where you can go around or break down so that you can overcome this obstacle. In fact, these obstacles that we find internally when faced, whether they are past traumas, certain habits that need to be understood, certain characteristics that can be improved, we need to approach these holistically. If there is a past trauma that keeps resurfacing and we are suffering from this, if there is an intense emotion, say for instance fear, and it keeps surfacing and we feel this anxiety keeps coming up, we can't go around it, we can't try to constantly avoid it, because avoiding it just means we are parking it so that it may resurface later on. This is why having a more holistic approach, we are keeping this problem, this anxiety intact, because we want it to be intact so that it can be understood. And only once it's understood can it be reconciled. Can we overcome this particular internal problem? And this is actually the path towards liberation, is to observe and witness the world holistically, in its wholeness, in its oneness, through the lens of IQ. In other words, through the lens of the intellectual mind that discerns and understands the world by fragmenting it, by breaking it up into different categories and compartments. We are actually doing the opposite of viewing the world holistically. And so if this is really the forefront of how we interpret reality, then our reality will be fragmented in this way. And perhaps, I'm just putting an idea out there, perhaps that's not the way the world really is. It's not fragmented. And in fact, it's whole. And really connecting and understanding and recognizing that wholeness, it's really what this life is all about. And so when we constantly categorize different aspects of life, we continue this fragmentation process. And then somewhere down the line, we may find ourselves looking in the mirror, thinking, something's missing, something's not right. I don't understand what's going on. I feel strange. And that could actually spiral into certain mental health issues and problems. And it cannot feel right. And it makes sense that it doesn't feel right, because once again, this whole oneness that is being experienced right now is actually fragmented. And certain fragments are hyper-focused. We are hyper-focused on only certain fragments. Now, one of these fragments is actually the identity or the ego. The ego brings about the illusion that the world is indeed fragmented. And the very initial fragment here is that if this is me, then this me is separate from everything. And in that separation, in the distance between the me and everything else, this is where a lot of conflict and suffering can actually manifest itself. How can you possibly be able to recognize the wholeness and oneness of life if there is a you to recognize that? Because if there is a you to recognize the absolute wholeness and oneness of life, then immediately there's the separation between this wholeness and oneness of life. and the you. But in fact, this fragmented you, or this ego, this sense of I, or this sense of identity that you are feeling, is also a part of this life. Without it, this wholeness cannot be whole in some sense. And this recognition, even though I am explaining it to you intellectually, can actually be experienced directly and is extremely liberating to realize that this you that you've been trying to protect all your life, that you've been trying to build all your life, that you've been trying to sharpen its edges all your life. If you recognize that this is actually a development of the of the intellectual mind, and that it's not something that's always been there, and it's actually an accumulation of thoughts and ideas and expectations and rules and beliefs, all of a sudden a lot of suffering will actually be alleviated, because suffering is only attached and a part of the belief that there is a you and everything else. And look at it this way. If you see yourself as the center of the universe, and this is typically a notion that has a negative connotation, and it's usually used to describe highly egotistical people. It's actually the case for most people anyway, even if you regard yourself as non-egotistical. In essence, if there is the belief that there is this I and this identity, then you cannot view life but through a lens where life is happening to you. And so if something nice happens, then you feel great. You're happy, you're over the moon. But if something negative happens, then you feel like you're going through hell. And it doesn't feel so great. And so in essence, life or reality as you know it is shackled to the definitions of circumstances. If I really have an expectation of how my day should go, the moment it doesn't go that way, we've had a bad day. The rest of the day is ruined. And so why allow circumstances to dictate your reality? Why create these expectations that are harnessed and held by this separate sense of I, this separate sense of identity? And it all goes back to this notion of the IQ having a high intelligent quotient. And so really this is an invitation to observe this phenomenon take place. This sense of I that is striving in this world, trying to reach all these goals, trying to uphold a particular image, trying to reach certain expectations and fulfill these expectations. And so life becomes a service to the ego, which by the way is just an idea. When you ask yourself, who am I? Whatever comes up is just an idea. I urge you to find where this idea is located, when it started, when it will end. I urge you to look into this idea, because this idea is really the root cause of all the wars that have ever happened, and the root cause of all suffering that has ever happened. The moment this idea is recognized as just that, an idea, or in other words, an object, that is no different to any other object, no different to this half full cup of water. It has a border around it, and it's defined in space. In the same way, the idea, the identity, the ego, the sense of separate self also seems to have a border around it, or an image, or some form of object attached to it. If you were able to see that the ego, or the sense of I, when you ask yourself, who am I, is no more than just an idea that's perhaps been transformed and developed over the years, then you will be liberated from the shackles of the ego itself. Whether you were 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever age, it's always been you. But what you liked many years ago, you may not like anymore today. So there's clearly been a change, but there has been the consistent you that is able to perceive that change. You are that which perceives in the same way that all of reality is perceived. You are not that which changes. And that which perceives cannot be fragmented, cannot be split, because in its essence, as life is whole and one. This is why trying to find or do self-inquiry, or trying to discover the ultimate truth, or wholeness, or God, or any of these things, it's not done in the same way you solve a problem where you require a high IQ. And as a side note, the sharper you are, the higher your IQ, great. It's good because you can solve a big chunk of life's problems efficiently and quickly, and can still give you an edge, indeed. But when it comes to realizing and recognizing the essence of what life really is, it's not the tool to use. It's really about recognizing that which holds the tool to begin with. Thank you so much for watching. This is Hassan from The Spiritual Walks, and we are all on a journey towards the truth.